everybody, and welcome back to David's Marvelous Pigments. I'm your host, David, and we're going to look at this gnomish piece here, the Gnomish Alchemist from the Wildspire Spellblade set. Before we get into talking a little bit about some of the inspiration on this piece, and I want to take a moment and just go ahead and hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so that you get notified the next time I post a video. All right, we're going to jump in here and talk a little bit today about mechanics versus flavor. Something I've mentioned in the past couple of videos, how I really like the mechanics in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, like some of the flavor from Pathfinder. But I don't think I've really explained what the difference is between mechanics and flavor in role-playing games. And I bring that up with this piece because my son's going to be using this gnome as his gnomish wizard for a campaign that he's playing. And I asked him, when I was getting ready to paint this, to get some ideas for it, to tell me about the flavor of his character. And he didn't really know what I meant. So after a little bit of talking through what I mean by flavor with him, he kind of gave me some ideas for it. And I'll kind of share some of that here with you in a minute. But to really explain the difference between what mechanics are in role-playing games versus the flavor in role-playing games, I want to talk a little bit about a game that's recently been re-released, and that's Warcraft. Not World of Warcraft, just the original real-time strategy Warcraft games. This year is the 30th anniversary for Warcraft, and so they've re-released some of their old games in sort of like a box set, so you can play some of the nostalgia for people who are my age who grew up playing Warcraft and Warcraft 1 and 2. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Now, in the original Warcraft games, you could be one of two factions. You could either play as the humans, or you could play as the orcs. And especially in Warcraft 1, the original Warcraft, there wasn't a lot of difference between the units for the humans and the units for the orcs. Both factions had analogous units. The humans had a basic frontline fighting unit called the Footman. It's just a guy wearing some armor holding the sword. The orcs had a corresponding unit called the Grunt. Just a big, brutish orc fighter wielding an axe. Now, the Grunt and the Footman both had the same hit points. They dealt the same damage. They were identical. As far as I could tell, maybe there's something in the code that shows a little bit of difference, but I don't think so. I think those two units were identical. Next, the humans had an archer. This human guy with a crossbow called the archer, whereas the orcs had a unit called the spearman, just the orc that threw a spear. Again, the archer and the spearman were identical. The only difference is that the human characters or units are human. When you click on them, tell them to walk around, they say things like, "Yes, my lord," and will walk around and do whatever you tell them to do. The orcs, on the other hand, will say various things in Orcish. They'll grunt at you, and they'll go off and do whatever you tell them to do. But mechanically, in the programming, or the rules for the game, a footman is equivalent to an orc. The nice thing about doing something like that in a video game like this is that if you have the two groups fighting each other, you have some sort of balance. You're not going to have one team unfairly stronger than the other. It makes that sort of balancing the game very easy to have identical units. All you've changed, the only difference between the two factions, is going to be that flavor. As you got into later or more advanced units in the game, you are going to have a little bit of difference, more than just flavor differences. For example, the humans had a unit called the Cleric that had healing spells and eventually could cast invisibility. Whereas the Orc unit, the Necrolite, which flavor-wise is very different than a Cleric, a healing character. The Necrolite was something that would raise dead units. So they're not like raise them back to life, but create a skeleton. So the Cleric had different mechanics than the Necrolite did. The Cleric would heal, the Necrolite would raise a skeleton. very similar kind of things that give more hit points for the cleric giving you more hit points. The skeleton didn't do very much damage, kind of acted as a meat shield. But the mechanics are at least different there. Not just a holy healer versus a dark spellcaster. You had mechanical differences there. And it's not until like in Warcraft 2, the second game, you had similar things going on there. You had very similar units on both sides. As you got more advanced, the casters had different spells that would really differentiate the two factions. But very similar. Blizzard, the company that made those games, didn't really get mechanical differences, a lot of mechanical differences in their factions and their games until you get to StarCraft, where you have 3 different factions that are very different mechanically. And they used other things to try and balance out the play there, rather than just having identical units. But we're not going to get into that. The idea here is, though, that mechanics is the rules, and how much damage something does versus what it looks like, the flavor. So when I started getting ready to paint this Gnomish Alchemist, I asked my son what he wanted the flavor to be like, and he didn't really know what I meant. Talked to him a little bit more about that, and asked him what it looked like when he cast the spell, and I kind of said, look, gnomes are tinkerers. They build things like little wind-up toys. Maybe when you summon your familiar, what you do is you throw out a little wind-up toy and it turns into your familiar. And he started to understand what I meant by the flavor there. And one of the things that he really latched onto was this tinkering idea for the gnome. Not the way I thought of it, where the spells would be sort of mechanical wind-up things that would do the effect. Instead, what he thought of was it would just look like that. Specifically for the spell Firebolt, which is an early spell for wizards that just is kind of a bread and butter spell you cast a lot to deal some damage. Throw a little fire blast at an enemy to burn it. And so the way he did that, he goes, it's called Firebolt. My gnome here is a caster and tinkerer. So one thing you put in like little mechanical things are nuts and bolts. Firebolt, I get a bolt, it gets really red hot, and maybe he throws that, or when he casts the spell, it looks like this bolt flying through the air, and that is his Firebolt spell. So he put his own little spin, his flavor, his own design to that spell, which I thought was a really clever way to do that, and I really like that. So when you're making your characters, not only do you want to think of the mechanics, how do this guy going to work, what spells does he get to cast, you want to look at what does it look like when he casts. Tell me the style of this guy. So yeah, think of that as you're making your characters and NPCs and your worlds, and keep creating, guys. Go ahead, hit the like, subscribe, do all those things, and we'll see you in the next video.